All right, today we're cracking open a 400-year-old cold case. We're looking into the mysterious death of a master painter who was also, believe it or not, a convicted murderer. The one and only Michelangelo Merisi da Caravaggio. So let's set the scene. Picture it, July 1610. You're on this desolate, sun-scorched beach in Tuscany. A man just collapses. He's feverish, completely alone. And this isn't just anybody. This is Caravaggio, the most revolutionary and, yeah, probably the most dangerous painter in all of Italy.
Now, the official story, he died of some illness. But with a guy like Caravaggio, nothing is ever that simple. So it leaves us with this big question, one that's been hanging around for centuries. Was his death just a tragic accident, or was it an execution?
Okay, so to get to the bottom of his death, we've got to rewind. Let's go back 4 years to Rome. This is where Caravaggio's incredible artistic genius and his, let's say, violent street life were on a catastrophic collision course. You see, to really get Caravaggio, you have to understand he was basically two different guys in one body. On one hand, you have this absolute genius who could literally find the divine in the gutter. He'd paint these incredible saints, but he'd use the faces of prostitutes and beggars he knew from the streets as his models. And on the other hand, he was a straight-up thug with a sword he wasn't legally allowed to carry, and a hair-triggered temper that was always looking for a fight. And then, on May 28, 1606, those two worlds just exploded. It all started with a dispute with some guy named Ranuccio Tomassoni. Nobody knows for sure what it was about. Maybe a woman, maybe a gambling debt. Who knows? But it escalates into this messy street fight. And Caravaggio, he lunges. But this wasn't some honorable duel. No, he aims a deliberate, totally humiliating blow right at Tomassoni's groin. The blade slices the femoral artery, and just like that, Tomassoni bleeds out and dies right there in the street. Literally overnight, Caravaggio goes from being the most famous painter in Rome to a convicted murderer on the run. The Pope himself issues what's called a bando capitale, which is basically a death sentence. It meant that anybody, anywhere, could legally kill him and collect a reward for it. A price was officially on his head, and he had no choice but to get out of town fast. So, where does a wanted man run? He heads south, all the way to the island fortress of Malta. Now, this place was home to the Knights of St. John, a really powerful military order, and Caravaggio had a plan. He figured he could trade his insane artistic skill for a pardon and, just maybe, a shot at a new life. And you know what? For a little while, it actually worked. The Knights were completely blown away by his talent, so much so they offered to make him a knight. And in return, he gives them his largest, most ambitious painting ever, this massive, chillingly realistic masterpiece, The Beheading of St. John the Baptist. But you have to look closer at this painting, because there's a shocking detail. This is the only painting Caravaggio ever signed, and he didn't sign it with paint. No, he wrote his name in the blood that's spilling from the Baptist's neck. It says F. Michelangelo. That F stands for fra, or brother. This was basically a confession from a man who knew exactly what killing looked like. And for a fleeting moment, he thought he'd finally found his salvation. But of course, that old demon followed him. Within weeks of becoming a knight, his temper gets the best of him again. He assaults a senior member of the order, gets arrested, and is thrown into a fortress prison. He pulls off this daring escape, but it was too late. His big chance at redemption, totally gone. And to add insult to injury, in a ceremony held right in front of his own masterpiece, the Knights officially kicked him out, declaring him a foul and rotten member. So think about it. He fled Rome as a murderer, and now he was fleeing Malta as a disgraced knight. He now had a second, powerful, super vengeful enemy hunting him. So now, he's a double fugitive. Caravaggio flees to Sicily, then to Naples. His paranoia is just off the charts. He's reportedly sleeping fully armed. And you can actually see this frantic, desperate state of mind just bleeding onto his canvases. His art gets darker, way more personal, and you can feel the desperation. You see, his final paintings weren't just jobs he was taking. They were deeply personal, painted pleas for mercy. And he sent them to the one guy in Rome who had the Pope's ear, the one man who could get him that pardon, Cardinal Scipione Borghese. And for us, these canvases are key pieces of evidence in our investigation. Okay, let's look at the first piece of evidence, his painting, David with the Head of Goliath. This is wild. He paints himself as the monster. That severed head of Goliath, it's a gruesome self-portrait of Caravaggio. But then look at young David's face. He's not triumphant. He looks sad, full of pity. This wasn't just a painting, it was a confession. And if that wasn't clear enough, check this out. On the blade of David's sword, he painted this tiny hidden inscription, HASOS. It stands for a Latin motto, Camilitas occidit superbium, humility kills pride. I mean, talk about an open acknowledgement of his own fatal flaw, the very thing that had completely wrecked his life. And then we have his final known painting, the martyrdom of Saint Ursula. And what does he do? He paints himself into this scene again. Only this time, he's just a guy in the background, craning his neck to watch a murder that he can't do anything to stop. It's this absolutely haunting reflection of his own guilt over killing Tomassoni all those years ago. So, he sends these painted confessions off to Rome, hoping, just praying for a pardon. But his enemies from Malta found him first. Outside a tavern in Naples, a group of assassins jumps him. But their goal wasn't to kill him. Oh no, they wanted to do something they thought was much worse. They systematically slashed and disfigured his face, leaving the world's greatest painter a mess. It was a brutal, brutal message, and it left him with a wound that just would not heal. But even after that horrible attack, word finally arrives, the pardon is coming. It's happening. He grabs his precious paintings and hops on a boat headed for Rome. But fate just had one last cruel joke to play. The boat makes a stop and he gets arrested by mistake. By the time they realize their error and let him go, the boat is gone. And with it, his paintings, his pardon, his entire future. Completely broken, he starts chasing it on foot, running along the coast in the brutal summer heat. And that brings us right back to that lonely beach where he collapsed. For the next 400 years, his death was a total mystery. You heard all kinds of rumors. Syphilis, malaria, maybe he was murdered by his enemies. But now, 21st century science has finally reopened the case file. So after all that running, all the fighting, all the just plain terrible luck, what really killed Caravaggio? All right, let's go through the evidence one theory at a time. For centuries, everyone figured it was a disease, right? Syphilis or malaria. But modern science looked at his remains, no trace. Okay, so what about a revenge plot? I mean, it's a great story, but the medical facts just don't line up. They did find high lead levels in his bones from all his paints, but that's a slow burn, not something that drops you dead on a beach. No, the real breakthrough, the honest-to-goodness smoking gun, came when they found a specific bacteria in his remains, Staphylococcus aureus. Scientists are about 85% sure the bones they found belonged to him, and that was enough to reach a solid conclusion. The official cause of death was sepsis, blood poisoning. That fire in his blood people talked about, it was a raging infection that came from that unhealed sword wound he got in the Naples ambush. So in a way, the Knights of Malta got their revenge after all. So case closed, right? Medically speaking, he died from sepsis. But that's not the whole story, is it? He died because his pride made him a killer. He died because his own rage turned him into a fugitive. That infected wound, it was just the final bill coming due for a life lived in a violent, chaotic world that he himself created. So in the end, was he killed by a festering wound? Or was he killed by the very same darkness he captured so brilliantly on canvas? A darkness that, it turns out, he could never escape.